How's it going, crypto community? And how's it going, XRP Martians out there? Real quick, if you haven't already, be sure before we start to hit that subscribe button. Be sure to like this video if you do enjoy it. And if you really enjoy it, make sure that you ring my bell so that you can be up to date on all videos that I release on XRP related content. This is part 2 of a breakdown of Christine Lagarde's interview she did today, where she discusses the G20 event and the global economy. I hope you enjoy, and without any further delay, let's jump right into it.
I can agree with you totally, that the impact could be enormous, because we've just got to think what happened in November and December when the US-China trade talks weren't going well. We saw markets slump by like 20%. So the impact, it seems to me that this trade issue, they really are playing with fire, that this could really derail the global recovery, through the financial market channel. But hopefully we don't get there.
I hope we don't, because
So real quick, what he was asking was more of a statement in the fact that, the events that we're witnessing unfold on a global scale right now are at present apparently leading us off of a cliff, to put it as simply as possible. And so this is how Christine Lagarde is going to handle that kind of a statement, right? Which is a statement I think many people around the world are... hello, brave ad, my old friend. Apologies. But let's see how Christine Lagarde handles this issue that I feel many of us can resonate with.
you see that one of the big differences. Stop me if I talk too much. But one of the big differences between now and, say, when we had the last big financial crisis, is that the space that is available to policymakers has been significantly reduced. You look at the monetary policy and the space that central banks around the world have, not much, really not much. And they have played out many of the tools available in unconventional monetary policies. You look at the fiscal position of many countries, despite many iterations, reiteration, contradictions, and all the rest of it on those matters. Many countries do not have any space. Some countries have a little bit of fiscal space, and you count on the fingers of one hand those countries that have a lot of fiscal space.
Yeah, well, I guess that is one of my concerns, is that the largest country in the world has used its fiscal space at a time that the recovery was very strong. So when the recovery gets weak, it's going to have limited fiscal space. But I guess another reason for concern about this trade issue is that it's not playing out in isolation. You mentioned Brexit, that we could have a hard Brexit. We just had a bad European parliamentary election result in the United Kingdom that looks like it's pushing towards a difficult situation in October. But then there's also issues like the Italian government in the latest election, that they seem to be going down the path of rather irresponsible fiscal policy. So I guess we're just not looking at this playing in isolation, which is, I guess, increases the urgency of trying to resolve this, that this is no time to be opening up another front, on the trade side.
So basically, that engagement between them there was her saying, yes, the economy is in a rather fragile, delicate state, similar to what she touched on in her introduction in part 1, which, if you haven't seen, you should absolutely go back and watch part 1 of this interview that we're breaking down here. This is just part 2, and there's likely to be at least a part 3, maybe even a part 4. We'll see how far we can get through this within hopefully a 20-minute window. But on to the points made here. She admits that the times look dire, they look bleak, but she feels confident that solutions can be implemented. And to our moderator's point, he's engaging back and saying, yes, I think that this dire straits that we find ourselves in requires immediate action. We can't take our time with this. This needs to be, addressed as quickly as possible before the challenges that it begins to present us become too insurmountable for the system to sustain, right? So let's continue on with our awesome discussion here, right?
Correct. And in many ways, those are, particularly on trade, those are self-inflicted wounds. And it's, politics aside, frankly, it's frustrating because we had seen in the post-crisis period trade decline gradually over the course of time, when before that it was double the global growth rate. And it was beginning to come up again and to rise, but 2 points above global growth rate. And if you look at the WTO numbers, if you look at the bank numbers, our numbers as well, we have indications now that trade is slowing down yet again. And yes, that is a frustration. We don't need to do that. There are issues. They have to be addressed. The WTO system needs to be improved, re-energized in many ways. The dispute resolution system needs to be fixed and needs to be functional. But we don't have to inflict wounds to ourselves. And it's
Right.
It's not going to leave many winners.
Right. I guess, what one could say.
So before he says what he believes one could say, allow one to say that what Madame Christine Lagarde here has just laid out is that, the current actions that have led up to this event are why what we're about to begin discussing is, needing to be discussed. And the seriousness of this is a matter of global stability. And it is important for us to go through with a plan that would prevent individual nations from consolidating power to such a degree that it begins to create infighting amongst the other powers as to how to handle an entity who is now creating scarcity within their ecosystems, an entity which they cannot as individuals combat because of the extent of the power that one entity in the ecosystem has, right? So let's continue on here. Hope you're enjoying.
Is that if the whole idea of trade restrictions is to try to reduce external imbalances, for instance, if you take the United States, if trade restrictions are to try to reduce the external imbalance, that's not what's going to do it. What's going to do it is sound fiscal policy, that the United States needs to save more, and the European Germany perhaps needs to save less. Germany needs to have an expansive fiscal policy. The United States needs to have a restrictive fiscal policy. What role do you see for the IMF in trying to get that conversation going? That in past years you had multilateral surveillance to try to get a better balance between the various countries, reduce the deficits of the ones who had large deficits, right. And similarly on the surplus side. Is there much scope?
There is, in that we produce every year something that we call the external sector report, which is informed by many data and which has the benefit, contrary to the sort of bilateral comparison that you were referring to, or the current account assessment on a bilateral basis, which brings all systemic and critical countries together to arrive at an overall system where we determine whether or not the situation of a country, and in particular the situation of its exchange rate relative to its position, is actually in line, or whether it is not in line with the fundamentals of the economies. What the Japanese presidency of the G20 has done is ask us, the IMF, to produce a special report on this issue of the imbalances around the world. And we are producing that report for the G20 at the Japanese presidency request. What's interesting in the report is that post-crisis, we have seen the imbalances shrink. If you think of China back in the immediate pre-crisis period, and you look at China's current account position at the moment, massive difference. It's gone from an 8-9% surplus to a very minimal surplus now. So emerging market economies have essentially shifted their position to being almost balanced, and where we see now, so that has shifted. But imbalances have not disappeared. They've shifted from being within the emerging market economies predominantly to being within the advanced economies and between advanced economies. So when you look at the US situation, as you just indicated, strong deficit. If you look at the German position, strong surplus, and has been growing, although it's beginning now to decline because the investment of Germany has now started picking up a bit. So I think the sort of, I hope that the collective wisdom of the G20 under Japanese presidency will be to look at those numbers, to look at the facts, to look at the causes of those imbalances. And there are some legitimate causes. When a country is aging, when the population is saving, then it's obvious that it's going to deliver a surplus. But it doesn't explain and justify some of the surpluses that we observe at the moment.
Right. So, to condense that big chunk there, what Christine Lagarde was breaking down, ultimately what they just discussed, was that, even though the central entity that is the United States has a large amount of concentration of the power of the global economy, because it farmed out the construction, the labor of our economy to these third world economies, so that we as Americans could enjoy our high life off of the value inherent in our now global reserve currency that we just use as our national currency, right? That's why we are in America allotted such a luxurious life, and even our most despot individuals in our society have access to the potential to such amazing opportunities. That's why, despite everything in our country, in many ways it is still viewed as a land of opportunity by most of the world. There's obviously places out there that kind of laugh at us because oh, they're so last century, but at the same time, by and large, most of the world still does look at us that way. Those individuals that we haven't soured our relationship with, unfortunately. But hopefully all things can be put to rest someday, right? But the beauty inherent in what Christine Lagarde is preaching here essentially is that, these systems are now, the external markets, she uses China as an example, are now rising to power to match the established market, which is the American and European markets. And so this challenge, this economic challenge, is beginning to have a dramatic impact on both the U.S. and Chinese economies. That's why Donald Trump is, engaging in this trade war, because China is sort of gotten a little too much. We were too giving to them in regards to allowing our companies and producers to go there to produce goods cheaper, and that is now having a detrimental impact on our economy. And now that automation is also kicking in, there's not many jobs being created by our advanced economy anymore, because most of the newer jobs that are coming out require, first off, a higher degree of education, in addition to unique work characteristics, skill sets that is just not inherent in the majority of people's skill sets. So, it's sort of a chicken and egg scenario of how do you transition our people to these new jobs, and how do we make this system that had worked for so long for so many people, how do we fix what was once working well when it has become now a crux to our progression, because these feedback loops that we've strengthened over all these years are now beginning to snap and have horrible ramifications upon our economies. And thus, who do we blame other than the person that these agreements are with, that we now witness, that we are now identifying as the root cause of our problem, right? So that's why it's so critical, and why it's so urgent that these institutions jump over to to a new system, to the new system that they're going to discuss in the second half of this. But we're going to continue on here and see what else juicy we can pull from this, right?
A lot of the problem is in the area of public finances, I guess. That countries that are running big deficits on the trade side are also running big deficits on the budget side. And it seems that it's not very logical that if they're running big budget deficits, what that tends to do is it tends to force the dollar higher, which is also counterproductive. So not only are they saving less, but they're having a strong dollar.
True.
So it just seems, at least to me, it seems, I guess I've got more liberty to say this than you do, but it seems rather misguided to have a tariff policy to cure this problem. That if you're running a big budget deficit, the United States has had the experience of twin deficits before. It looks like we're going down that path, that over the past 2 years, the deficit's been increasing rather than narrowing. Let me ask quite a different question. We mentioned Brexit could be a problem. I mentioned that Italy, could be a problem. I wonder whether you could tell us going forward, what kind of role would the IMF play in resolution of a problem, say within the Eurozone? You could argue that in 2010, Europe wasn't equipped to deal with these kind of crises. But since then, they've established the European Stability Mechanism. The ECB's got the outright monetary transaction window. My question is, would the role of the fund be different? Would we be seeing the fund working with a troika, or is that something of the past that the fund might still be involved, but it would be a different kind of involvement?
If I look back, and I started that period of financial crisis as a finance minister, as a player at the Eurogroup table, and then I shifted to to the IMF in 2011. If something of a similar nature was to happen now, if there was a euro area sovereign debt crisis, for instance, God forbid, because those were not happy days, and I really hope that it doesn't happen again. But for the purpose of our discussion here, if it was to happen, it's a different world. It's a different world where, as you said, the ECB has explored various mechanisms and tools that it could use again, some of which have not yet been totally explored, but I'm sure Mario and his successor would be able to use that. Second, there is the European Stability Mechanism, which is endowed with over 500 billion euros, which was not available at the time of the Irish, Greek, Cypriot, Spanish crisis, and a few others. So that's also a huge big buffer that is there, and that could be called upon if a bank was in a very difficult situation, because they've allowed for that to operate as a backstop under certain conditions. So that's one. Not to say that the sort of incestuous loop between banks and sovereign has been completely severed. That's not happened yet, and I think that's sort of mission to be completed. There is a resolution mechanism that has been negotiated, agreed upon, and which is enforceable in all the systemic banks in Europe. So there are tools there that could be used. I think that both the IMF and the ECB would, if they were asked to intervene and to help, would operate in a different capacity. I don't want to speak for the ECB because they're big boys and they can do that for themselves. But for us, I think that we would be working hand in hand with the ESM if the countries wanted us to do that. We have a membership of 189 countries. The euro area as such is not a member of the IMF. But each and every 18 members of the IMF, 18 members of the Eurogroup is a member of the IMF. So we might, again, help if it was needed. But my guess is that the Europeans who have built this ESM would want to call on the ESM to be the sort of first line of defense. And I'm not sure that we would use the concept of Troika anymore, because the Troika was the European Commission, the European Central Bank, and us. I think it would work differently. And they're trying to build fiscal capacity within the ESM as well in order to build up expertise.
But the big difference.
So we're going to end this part here at the 28-minute mark. So this is most likely going to be a 4-part series. I apologize for the dog in the background and also the phone that you heard go off right as I was beginning to speak last time. I apologize for both. But to try to spark notes Christine Lagarde's last basically 5-10 minutes here. This conversation was primarily in regards to how banks and countries, how the relationship between a governing agency. Sorry, I think I'm getting the hiccups. Anyways, how a governing agency and a financial institution, how their relationship should be managed as far as the closeness of their relationship. And this is something that Christine Lagarde believes that there needs to be sort of like a separation of church and state, a separation of state and money, right? And that will play in greatly to what we're going to what this conversation is eventually going to divulge into near the end. But I want to do this series where we really go through everything that they're talking about, because it's really important to have background, so that you don't have the idea that this is just some cheerleading hurrah for digital assets. No, this conversation is very serious, and the issues that our global economy is facing is very serious, and that's why they have moved so rapidly from rejecting cryptocurrencies to saying, you know what, we gotta do this because it's the only option available to us, because we need to be able to source liquidity during the oncoming crisis, and this crisis is likely not going to be able to source that liquidity through fiat currencies, because consumers, users of those currencies, are going to begin to lose faith in them because of the massive amount of quantitative easing that would be required to be injected into that system to be able to facilitate that kind of liquidity. That's also what facilitates the very real potential for cryptocurrencies to, when they moon next, like when they really moon, down the line, when they get their real moon, it's going to be so monumental, it's going to make everyone in the world's head spin. I guarantee it. Like, I don't know why I feel that, but when it does happen, like the real mass adoption wave, what we will see in the years to come when that occurs, not saying that's happening tomorrow or next month, but I'm saying that in the coming years, as this plan is rolled out on a global scale, as these high ranking individuals within the financial institutions, within government agencies, come to these resolutions that I have been spending my time focusing on, it's going to, the message is loud and clear, the writing is on the wall, as they say. This is the dawn, right? This is where you, as somebody who is investing in this thing as a casual investor, should be like, this person is telling every bank what to do. She is one of the most prominent individuals in all of the financial world. And what we're doing is we're sitting here discussing her view of the current economic global ecosystem, right? So this is big stuff that we're talking about, and so it's really important for everybody to really pay attention to what such a powerful individual is saying, right? She may not be the richest person in the world, but she definitely governs over a significantly large fund. I apologize, I don't know what that sound was, but apologies for anybody that heard that. But at any rate, that's all I've got for you in this part 2 of the Christine Lagarde interview regarding G20 and the global economy. I look forward to seeing you in part 3. Once again, if you've enjoyed this video, please hit that like, smash that subscribe if you haven't already, and please be sure to ring that bell so that you can stay up to date with all the content that I'm creating, bringing to you to help you understand why XRP truly is the new global standard for money. So, I've been Jade Martian. I look forward to seeing you, my XRP Martians, as always, on Mars. Yep, there you are, my old friend.